In the first weeks of December 1927, a devastating winter storm was bearing down on the Great Lakes of America. Riding out to the front, the steamer Valcartier arrived at the Sioux Locks riding low in the water under a weight of ice. Her exhausted crew reported temperatures on Lake Superior of -40 Fahrenheit. In her wake loomed a massive snowstorm, and it was into these nightmarish conditions that another 2 steamships had recently departed. Travelling together through dense fog and a heavy sea, the Kamloops and Keydok were unaware of the rocky island directly in their path. At the last moment, the Keydok spotter sounded the alarm, and as the freighter veered sharply away from danger, the lights of the nearby Kamloops were swallowed by fog and darkness. Her fate remained unknown until May of the following year, when fishermen on Ile Royale discovered the first bodies, many of which were still wearing lifebelts and huddled around the remains of a fire pit a short distance from the shore. The scene revealed a tragic story of 9 crew members who had survived the sinking and made it safely to shore, managing to light a signal fire despite the raging storm. As the hours passed, they had clung desperately to life, perhaps even long enough to see amber eyes in the low light, even to witness their death approaching with sharp fangs and pointed ears as they fell prey to the island's wolf population. Or at least, that's the story we know today. Could wolves really have killed and eaten the survivors? And what are the chances of a similar fate befalling those who venture out into the wilderness today? In this episode, we'll dive into the waters of a debate, which is often as difficult to navigate as those rocks on which the Kamloops wrecked. We'll traverse some 45,000 years of wolf and human interactions, and analyse the events surrounding some of the most recent tragedies. Welcome back to Project DarkWolf. Before we sink our teeth into this discussion, so to speak, this isn't an easy topic to cover. Depredation on humans can be seen as something of an inconvenient truth, easier to discuss in scientific journals and reports than it is in your average national park tour brochure. When you consider the dedication and expense which has permitted the species' ongoing recovery, it would be nothing short of a disaster to rekindle our unnecessary hatred of the wolf by overemphasizing the risks they pose. So it is that in place of a coherent understanding, our opinions have been shaped by films such as 2011's The Grey or 1983's Never Cry Wolf, both of which have unfortunately misled audiences the world over. Reality is never so black and white as these portrayals though, as we are about to discover. The wolf today exists throughout much of the Northern Hemisphere, where the largest populations survive in regions such as Alaska, Canada, and Russia. The more densely human-inhabited regions, such as Europe and the lower 48 states, also support stable populations. Throughout the rest of Asia, the facts become a little more sketchy, with some areas producing a pretty reliable estimate, while others rank large carnivore monitoring pretty low on their agenda. Some areas don't seem to have it on their agenda at all. We tend to imagine these animals as being restricted to all but the most isolated regions, far from human habitation. In reality, this is a generalization. There is a common belief that, as a perceived symbol of wilderness, the wolf is exclusive to such. This is far from true. In the present day, the wolf is as willing to survive in highly populated areas as it is hundreds of miles from them. This is mostly the result of human infrastructure. As we saw back in episode 2, a byproduct of our developing world is the fragmentation of natural habitat, and so, where towns fracture the landscape, wolves can and do thrive in their immediate vicinity, though generally avoid human contact. This relatively close proximity may seem counterintuitive. Many of us have distanced ourselves from the wild in our minds, yet the physical borders are far more dynamic. Look closely enough in most cities, and nature's presence is everywhere, a perpetual siege against the artificial. Yet, irrespective of whether wolves are common in an area, or absent from it entirely, their presence also remains strong within folklore and legend. These often revolve around a helpless victim falling prey to the wolf, such as in the now infamous Little Red Riding Hood. Were a biologist present during that fictional encounter, though, they could correlate the animal's behaviour, not including wearing clothes and talking, with a number of potential causes, some of which aren't necessarily obvious until you consider them. In 1970, renowned wolf expert David Meach wrote in his book The Wolf, "There has never been a documented case of a healthy wild wolf killing or seriously injuring a person in North America." And at the time, his assessment was sound. In the decades since, however, we know this to be inaccurate, Meach himself having retracted the statement. Yet the notion that wolves are incapable of harming humans has become an especially pervasive urban myth. To gain some context, it's necessary to recognise that wolves are not inherently harmless, as well as the circumstances under which they may pose a threat, and why we will only consider two of these circumstances as an attack by a healthy animal. Rabies is a viral infection that targets the central nervous system. Upwards of 50,000 people die from the virus every year after being bitten by a rabid animal. Fatalities are often due to a delay in medical treatment, particularly in developing countries where the vaccine can be unattainable. The virus and its symptoms of abnormally aggressive behaviour are well known, and it should go without saying that we can exclude such cases from our definition of an attack by a healthy wild wolf. Likewise, we won't be discussing incidents involving captive or tame wolves, since their behaviour differs substantially from their wild counterparts. Most non-lethal attacks are by wolves which have been cornered or surprised, and respond with a single or a quick succession of bites in order to swiftly escape. This also includes instances where a wolf has attempted to steal an item from a person and accidentally bitten them in the process. Other examples include wolves approaching and escorting humans for a short distance, or rushing at them before stopping short. These instances rarely involve serious injury. However, it can be a sign that the animals are becoming fearless, which we'll look at in more detail in Part 5. It should also be noted that, on occasion, weakened animals have shown predatory behaviour towards humans. This is out of necessity rather than preference. A wolf which is unable to catch prey due to a disease or injury may be more willing to take greater risks to avoid dying of starvation. Such risks can include attacking a sleeping or vulnerable person, yet the animal's weakened state often means it can be more easily driven away and poses less of a threat than a healthy animal. The main focus of this episode, and the concept you are likely most familiar with. This includes behaviour such as stalking, chasing, and a sustained attempt to kill the intended prey. Evidence of our coexistence with the wolf dates right back to the Upper Paleolithic. That's the Late Stone Age, around 45 to 30,000 years ago. Cave paintings from this era suggest that early humans were familiar with lupine behaviour, which isn't surprising given the fact that the two would likely have come into close contact whilst hunting. Although detailed accounts are separated from us by a breadth of time untraversable by language or art, our ancient ancestors' relationship with wolves is not a complete mystery. These early peoples favoured a similar nomadic lifestyle to that of Inuit and Native American tribes, whose collective accounts survive to the modern day. We know that these peoples invariably regarded the wolf as a skilled hunter, yet across America's vast wilds it was simultaneously revered, feared, trusted and trapped, dependent on which of the highly diverse belief systems were adhered to. There is little evidence of any significant threat posed by wolves in pre-colonial America, likely as a result of the natives' largely sustainable lifestyle. Across the Atlantic, a very different story played out as the inhabitants of Eurasia adopted farming and herding as a way of life. As early as the 11th century, fields and villages in modern-day Europe began to rapidly replace native forests, and the likelihood of encounters between humans and increasingly hungry wolves proportionally increased. The events which took place in southern France from 1764 to 1767, however, are unheard of elsewhere in history. Known as the Beast of Gévaudan, it is possibly the most well-documented historical case of wolf predation on humans. Over a 3-year period, as many as 210 people were attacked by a mysterious and powerful animal. Almost half of the victims were found partially consumed, ruling out the possibility of rabies, where the victim is rarely fed upon. As the death toll increased, the army assisted locals in a mass cull of the region's wolves. Despite this, it would be a further 2 years before the animals responsible were discovered. These were identified from scars inflicted by those acting in self-defense, and later human remains were found inside the stomach of the second animal. The exact nature of the beast has never been truly confirmed. However, there is a wide consensus that for a period of 3 years, 2 abnormal wolf-like creatures caused unprecedented chaos in the French countryside. This stark contrast to the situation in North America serves as an extreme example of how increased human presence and a change in land use fueled the conflict between our 2 species. Following the continued decline of Europe's wolf populations, attacks became ever less frequent, the vast majority of those involving rabies. Although uncommon, there remained the occasional report of injury from a predatory attack. However, these are often complicated by a lack of conclusive evidence or thorough investigation by authorities. The overall picture of suspected attacks that emerged from Europe in more recent years describes a rare combination of poor judgment and a chance encounter, a mixture that we'll revisit later. Data throughout Russia and Asia pertaining to wolves in general has always been scarce. Although rabies remains a more significant factor, there are a number of reports from India detailing how children have fallen prey to wolves. Statistically, this is considered plausible, as unaccompanied children are often easier to obtain in such an altered landscape than wild prey, a problem made worse by extreme overpopulation in some of the areas where these incidents occur. Much of Asia today echoes the situation in Gévaudan 250 years ago, where accounts are confused and hard to verify. As we enter the information age, it is clear that our lack of coherent data until now has helped give rise not to an informed understanding, but resulted in the popularity of 2 equally dangerous myths: that wolves act based upon an innate fear or an inherent aggression in the presence of humans. The past 50 years have seen scientific and public interest in the wolf vastly increase, and the species' successful reintroduction both sides of the Atlantic have become almost synonymous with mankind's newfound protectiveness of nature. The story of Little Red Riding Hood soon became a distant memory in our culture, an artifact of a bygone time. As the notion of this new harmless wolf rose in popularity, many people, myself included, were enamoured with the story of such a long misunderstood species. It would not be until the winter of 2005 that this myth would prove fatal, fueling any remaining hostilities as the realization that the wolf is still misunderstood began to dawn. At approximately 3 p.m. in early November 2005, 22-year-old student Kenton Carnegie set out from the Point North Supply Depot, an isolated outpost in northeastern Saskatchewan, Canada. He had planned a 2-hour hike in the surrounding wilderness, intending to return half an hour after sunset. When he remained absent from the camp at 7 p.m., now 2 hours overdue, a search party was dispatched. The student's body was soon discovered at a trailhead a short distance from the facility. His co-workers claimed that wolves were present in the area when they arrived, and that his body was surrounded by their tracks. Bite marks were also found on Carnegie's body, which was photographed on the scene. An extended 2-year investigation by the local government followed, and it was eventually ruled that wolves had most likely been responsible for his death. While this conclusion could not be proven unequivocally, it remained the most plausible. In fact, the warning signs that an attack was possible had been clearly visible for at least a year prior to his death, beginning with a lone worker being attacked by an emaciated wolf in nearby Key Lake on New Year's Eve. It is thought that wolves in the area were unable to obtain prey due to a series of wildfires during the summer having weakened the ecosystem in time for winter, which is described by the Fish, Wildlife and Lands Department as often the most extreme in nature. Wolves had been preying on livestock, according to locals, and were being drawn closer to human habitation to obtain food. An unfenced landfill close to Point North had served this exact purpose for some time prior to the incident, and it was reported that the animals had been learning the schedule of vehicles delivering refuse. This inevitably resulted in an habituation. The wolves became familiar with human behaviour and associated their presence with food. Only 4 days prior to Carnegie's death, this fearlessness developed into agonistic behaviour, where the animals tested the reaction of staff at the facility by approaching them and acting aggressively. It was clear to the wolves humans and food were strongly connected, and their previously cautious behaviour dramatically changed as a result. Yet still, little effort was made to ensure the employees' safety, and Kenton was still given permission to hike alone in the evening. Perhaps the final, decisive mistake was made only at the last minute. It is believed that when he realised wolves were nearby, Carnegie quickened his pace, later breaking into a run. This is absolutely not a recommended strategy around any large carnivore, and the irony is that it likely prompted the wolves to attack when they saw him flee. It's difficult to say whether any part of the body had in fact been consumed, as even the eyewitnesses couldn't seem to agree on anything except that wolves were nearby, and that Kenton was definitely dead. Understandable, given the shock they must have felt. After 2 years, it was eventually determined that a predatory attack by wolves was responsible, based on circumstantial, yet compelling evidence. In response to the incident, 2 wolves which showed evidence of habituation towards humans in the area were shot, and a fence has since been erected around the landfill site. This already tragic event was made even more so because it was completely avoidable. Even though wolves in Canada were protected at the time, residents could still apply for a permit to destroy nuisance animals. Yet, as the situation was left to spiral out of control, It would go on to serve as a reference for monitoring fearless wolves in the future. Effectively, an early warning system that could help prevent unnecessary deaths on both sides. Perhaps it's testament to the unlikely circumstances surrounding a fatal attack that 3,000 miles and 5 years separate the most recent from that of Kenton. Chignik Lake is an isolated community on the Alaskan Peninsula, maintaining a year-round population of just over 70 residents. It was around 6 p.m. in early March of 2010 that 4 residents travelling on the only road into town noticed a trail of blood in the snow. Following it downhill, they encountered the body of 32-year-old Candice Berner. This time, there were no questions surrounding the cause of death. The investigation which followed this time was competent and thorough, the scene being well documented by a Department of Fish and Game biologist within 72 hours of the incident. Because of this, we have a good idea of the events which must have transpired. A local school teacher, Berner had left the town to go running along the single-access road which snaked across the desolate landscape. 1.5 hours before sunset, she had been running around a blind bend in the road when she encountered a group of between 2 and 4 wolves, travelling in the opposite direction along the same road. The wolves were not tracking her, simply using the road as a means to traverse their territory with ease. This is in fact common behaviour amongst wolves. Adverse weather and the fact that she was likely listening to her MP3 player meant that the two parties were likely within very close range when they encountered each other. Potentially surprising the wolves as much as herself, she immediately turned back and headed towards Chignik Lake, possibly still running. This was the last decision she ever made. Her jog and her life met with a swift end, just 150 feet down the road. In response to the strong evidence for animal predation, the Department of Fish and Game culled a total of 8 wolves in the area, both for public safety and to help determine the cause of the attack. 6 of the 8 animals destroyed were in good physical condition. However, the 2 closest to the kill site were abnormally thin. DNA evidence concluded that at least one animal involved in the attack was in excellent health, though whether they had gone hungry immediately before the event remains unknown. Unlike in the case of Kenton Carnegie, the investigation concluded that there was no evidence of disease or habituation, though it's worth noting that wolves in the area appeared to live in close proximity to humans, and that a number of non-aggressive interactions were documented prior to the attack, although residents had not attempted to remove or deter wolves from the area. It is believed that the attack may have been instigated by the victim's movements being interpreted as fleeing by the pack, coupled with her relatively short stature of just 4'10". The Alaska Department of Fish and Game informed residents that jogging alone and other solo activities in remote parts of Alaska entail inherent risk, but an attack by wolves is not to be considered commensurate with bear attacks, inclement weather, or personal injury. Originally from Pennsylvania, Berner had been enthusiastic about spending time in such a remote location as Alaska. She had a healthy respect for the dangers posed by wildlife, and in her blog, she is quoted as saying, "Chignik Lake's mascot is a wolf. It's a great reminder of what lurks outside in the wilderness, and to be on the alert at all times." It's possible that, like Kenton Carnegie, alertness alone could not compensate for a lack of experience around wild animals. If you attempted to link these cases through some underlying cause, you'd probably find the closest connection is that both occurred under exceptional circumstances. When considered alongside the lesser, more numerous encounters that take place every year between humans and wolves, it becomes clear that the events surrounding them are so varied, the only guaranteed universal solution would be the complete removal of one species or the other, an act which most would agree is impractical as it is unethical. At the time of writing, the most promising long-term solution is adapting the study of human-coyote interactions to model wolf behaviour. Coyotes living close to humans have been well studied over a longer time period, and may help to model and further understand wolf behaviour in similar circumstances. This is something to consider in situations whose scale is beyond our control, such as an unforeseen change to an ecosystem. Some areas have already developed this into a proactive way to deal with problem wolves emerging, specifically those who show a lack of fear around people. This lack of fear does not necessarily imply displays of aggression. Young wolves, especially those born with a more inquisitive nature, are less experienced and can be naive when encountering a human for the first time. The same can also be said for many humans encountering a wolf for the first time, and so discouraging visitors from attempting to feed or approach them can go a long way to prevent behavioural problems from emerging in wolves, and likewise correct those in visitors. It is considered less likely for wolves to approach a group of people, especially those who are acting confidently. Not going out hiking alone is good advice in itself, since getting lost, losing signal on your phone, or falling over or off the scenery are all inherent dangers of the outdoors. In fact, it's more likely that you experience all three of these than be injured by a wolf. Yet there will never be a zero probability, and it is likely that the frequency of encounters between our species will increase as our population grows and more people spend time relaxing, working and living in wolf country. It will become increasingly important to monitor and address problematic behaviour as it develops, and a 1995 story from Canada illustrates just how early on the opportunities to do so can arise. Wildlife photographers on Ellesmere Island had been leaving food for local wolves in order to entice them closer to the cameras. At the same time, personnel at the Alert and Eureka military bases in the area had also been directly feeding a pack of wolves over an extended period of time, in addition to leaving open garbage dumps. The inevitable result was that all 11 of the food-conditioned animals later approached a lone wildlife officer over 50 kilometres away with the expectation of receiving food. As she attempted to slowly back away, one wolf grabbed hold of her sleeve, evidently in an attempt to gain the reward it thought she was withholding. Although the officer was uninjured in the encounter, it is clear where action could have been taken. Initially, removing the stimuli may have been enough to preserve the wolf's natural wariness. Even with the emergence of food-conditioned behaviour, it is sometimes possible to counteract this with sufficient negative stimuli, such as loud noises and pain in the presence of humans, referred to as hazing, have been used with varying degrees of success. When the animals continue to be rewarded for approaching people, or are otherwise incapable of sourcing natural prey, the need for lethal removal becomes a fallback. If you're familiar with the phrase, "a fed bear is a dead bear," these are very similar circumstances to those under which it was coined. For those unlikely few who leave the beaten trail and inadvertently stumble upon a wolf den, a meeting place or kill site, the situation is not nearly so desperate as you may think. Any nearby wolves will make you aware of this trespass by howling, barking, and sometimes rushing at intruders before veering away, usually without attacking. They are in fact far more interested in defending their pups or their food, and despite what you may have heard, also possess no concept of revenge. Ultimately, the outcome of an encounter is often decided by the actions of those involved. There are government publications freely available, the links are hopefully on screen and down in the description below. All of these offer free advice on how to respond should you find yourself face to face with a wolf. If you live in wolf country or vacation there, definitely go check them out. If this video has made you reconsider your next camping trip, then here's some much needed context. Every year, around 700 people in the United States are killed by wild animals. Of these, over 400 are the result of traffic collisions with them. Over 200 are the result of a disease contracted following a non-lethal attack. Around 8 people are killed directly by wild animals every year, and of these, 6 are snake bites. Annually, an average of 0.1 people die from a wolf attack. This is the same number as attributed to bison. At the time that these statistics were published, the United States population totaled around 325 million. Statistically, attacks, let alone fatal ones by wolves, are extremely rare, and as one report notes, there are upwards of 50,000 wolves in North America, many of which are living in close proximity to millions of humans, and yet we only find evidence of a handful of attacks in recent decades. Although I've done my best to remain unbiased in this topic, researching for this video has exposed me to the same sources time and again, being used to support all manner of conflicting agendas. Whether you are an advocate of wolf conservation or oppose it, keep in mind that facts and citations can easily be taken out of context to maintain or change your opinion. I hope that I've allowed you to form one for yourself. Finally, I hope that you have learned we don't understand the wolf entirely, and it remains a mysterious and complex animal, one very much like nature herself. Neither can be made completely safe. The small, yet inherent risk they pose is fundamental to their being, and I personally believe that both share the same right to exist as we do, and are an intrinsic part of the world around us. So, what really became of the Kamloops survivors during that fateful winter of 1927? After all, it does seem plausible that the story could hold some water. The only clues lie in David Meach's original 1966 paper on the island's fauna, and accounts of those who helped search for survivors following the sinking. Together, they reveal that Ile Royale was possibly home to a single wolf at the time. This elusive animal was never directly sighted, and so given the abundance of large and small natural prey documented on the island at the time, it seems unlikely for it to have approached the signal fire and shipwrecked crew. There is also no mention of signs of predation upon the bodies when they were discovered, or of any possible cause of death other than exposure. Although knowledge of the crew's exact fate accompanied them to their graves, the idea that they encountered wolves is a modern embellishment. In fact, it would not be until the winter of 1948 that an ice bridge from the peninsula saw Ile Royale become home once more to a stable wolf population, some 21 years after the Kamloops wrecked.
The wolf in your eyes blinks first and dies. Beauty and fear, the wolves and the people.